Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Throughout this season, our focus is New York City and the Great Recession. I'm pleased to be joined by Robert Lieber. He has been serving as New York City's Deputy Mayor for Economic Development. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, how's New York City doing?
Well, I think New York City is doing very well. And I think when you look at the theme, I guess, is recession and downturn, how are we doing? I think part of it is a measurement of relative to what. So I think overall New York City is in a very good position relative to the rest of the state and relative to the rest of the country. I'd also say, Ken, that I think we're doing relatively much better than where we thought we might be as we made this forecast back at the end of 2008, which in hindsight was pretty dire when we considered that.
Job losses have not been as bad as expected. Is that because the financial institutions that took the biggest hit and the sort of businesses that support them are doing better than expected, or is it because of something about New York City itself?
Well, I think it's a combination of both things. I think when you go back and you look, our forecast back again in December of 2008 was something like 293,000 jobs to be lost. That number was updated in, I think, February of 2009 to be a little over 300,000 jobs. And, we saw a big part of that job loss coming out of the financial services sector, not surprisingly. But also the associated industries that support financial services. I think without a doubt, I think the intervention by the federal government, the TARP program and the other programs that came along to help prop up particularly the big banks was very helpful because I think it provided stability and I wouldn't call it confidence necessarily, but maybe reassurance for the banks that they could hold on to their people and that there were necessary jobs that needed to be performed because they needed to manage their way out of this and repay the money that the federal government had put in to prop up the banks. So that clearly, I think, had a big help, and the job losses that we saw out of financial services were significantly less than what we had forecasted.
One of the things that the mayor talked about just before Lehman Brothers was the prospect of excessive federal regulation, Sarbanes-Oxley and other regulatory measures crippling New York as a world capital center, and that we would be losing business to London, to Dubai, and to other places. Do you still think that that's a genuine threat?
Well, again, I'd go back to the relative component of that. In an absolute sense, if everybody makes the same kind of regulatory adjustments across the globe, then I don't think we'll be disadvantaged. I think the threat that we see here in New York is that the regulation that's imposed is particularly punitive and causes financial institutions and others to move somewhere else where they can do their business differently than what they would do here. If the other jurisdictions are more enabling, then that would be a big risk for us. So I think a big part, not just back in 2008 ahead of the Lehman collapse, but also as we look forward here with financial regulation that's being proposed in Congress now, is it's not just what happens here in the United States, and I'll call it the United States because people try and view this as Wall Street versus Main Street. I think it's much more fundamental than that. Main Street and Wall Street are inextricably tied. So what happens in the financial services sector here in New York City, New York State, has major economic repercussions throughout the country. So the regulation that's enacted now needs to be done in conjunction with what's happening overseas, what's taking place in Brussels on the continent, and what's happening in London and the UK as well as what's happening in Asia, because You look at Asia, and that's a natural place because there's so much growth that's happening organically there that we'd also see businesses migrate.
The mayor has said, and I'll paraphrase, that cost is not the New York City value proposition, that there's always going to be some jurisdiction that'll cut taxes more where the cost of doing business is less, and that his economic development strategy has been to attract talent, give people places to live, work, and play, and that talent will drive the economy of New York. That was a easy philosophy to sustain, maybe not to implement, but to sustain at a time when budgets were expanding and there was money to put into rebuilding the city's infrastructure. How does that stack up if we continue to be nationally sort of economically stagnant and if tax revenues in New York remain flat?
Well, we will never be, in business school parlance, the low-cost provider. Will be the value-add provider here. And people come to New York because of the opportunities that exist in New York, because of the diversity that exists in New York, because of the excitement that exists in New York, and greater opportunities exist here. So we'll never have business come here just because this is the lowest cost place to operate. But they'll come here because they can get the talent. But costs are an issue, and it is expensive to do business in New York and to live in New York. So we constantly have our eye on the cost side of this as well, because at a certain point, people will vote with their feet and they will move. And we're at a great risk of, because of the budget situation that exists in Albany and the different metrics or opportunities they're looking at to bring the budget under control. If we just simply raise taxes and can't fundamentally address the issues about the underlying cost structure that exists here in New York State, then we're going to have big competitive disadvantages, because people who can will move to Connecticut, will move to Florida, and will move other locations because the overall cost just become too high.
And is New York City the master of its own fate in that regard, or are we really dependent on what's going to happen in Albany?
We're really dependent on what happens in Albany. We're not masters of our own fate at all. And I go back to the argument, there's a relative component and there's an absolute component. If the federal government imposes greater taxes, that won't be as negative to us as if the state raises their own taxes, or the city. That's why we've been pushing so hard to keep our taxes where they are and not bump them up. But if the state does that, then you will see the migration of people away. And at a certain point, if the federal government raises taxes across the board for some individuals and for some businesses, the overall cost will just be so high they say, you know what, the value proposition doesn't exist anymore because the costs are too high. I can move somewhere else and get the same benefits.
Some observers have suggested that the focus of the Bloomberg administration over at least the second term in economic development was more project-oriented rather than policy-oriented. In other words, you put your political capital into getting Willard's Point, Hunters Point South, Coney Island, other projects through the approval process, as opposed to focusing in on city tax policy or regulatory reform, or other more broad-based efforts. Do you think that's a fair comment?
No, I would not stipulate to that. I would say we've actually done both. And I think if you look at, for example, tax policy, we had the biggest revision in New York City taxes in over a quarter of a century that was passed last year to try and equalize the cost of doing business in New York versus doing business in the state. So whether it be around the loophole closers, it be around single sales factor, a number of different components to this that made this a lower cost place for businesses to work. And it was one of the most sweeping changes that was made, again, in over 25 years. Now, we tried to do that relatively under the radar screen so that we could actually get something done. And I think I joined in the second term, and part of our goal has been to convert as many of the great ideas that we had into things that were actually tangible efforts, whether it be policy or project, that actually got done. So when I started and looked at a list of 293 separate initiatives, whether it be projects or policy initiatives, the idea was, okay, how many of these can we actually get done, and what do we define done as? And if we get 293 of them 45% of the way there, when the next guys come in, what happens? And so we made the decision, let's try and narrow that playing field a little bit, and let's focus on those projects that we actually can get to the point, the inflection point that the next administration that follows us will look and they'll say, geez, look at all these different things they had. What makes sense to continue? What makes sense to get rid of? We wanted the list to include as many things to continue as possible. So whether it be the number 7 train, or whether it be Willets Point, or whether it be Coney Island, or whether it be, you know, the World Trade Center, all of these things were incredibly high focuses and high priorities for us to make sure that we could get these into the position the next guys could follow up on it.
And then the change in the term limits law, sort of give us sort of an insider's view. You've got this countdown clock in the bullpen that's telling you that the time is running out. You think that the mayor is reaching the end of his term, and then I guess one day he either polls you or tells you, one depending on which version you believe, that that you're going to be getting a new lease on life. Did that impact on how you approach the problem?
Well, I think it was refreshing in a way because it gave us the opportunity to look at things with another 4 or 5 year window that we, you know, frankly hadn't had as much of, because we wanted to get as many of these things done as we possibly could.
Do you think that was part of the motivation that the mayor had for changing the law? Is he didn't think he was going to get enough done before he left?
No, I don't think that had anything to do with it. I think we were on track to get a lot of this stuff done, and we did. And so as I look back at 2008 in particular, we saw 2008 as really the fulcrum point for us on the projects, on the land use initiatives in particular, is because in order to get things teed up, ready to go, you had to have all these pieces in place so that when you entered the Euler process and worked through City Council, you'd know what the time clock was. So I didn't take a day off in 2008. A couple of days at Memorial Day, I take it back, because we knew that what we got done in 2008 was really going to dictate those things we were able to complete by the end of 2009. And then we had the opportunity, and now I think, you know, the economy's different today, the opportunities are different today, the needs are different today, and I think for us, the ability to try and streamline operations and streamline efficiency of government to, again, make this city an easier place for people to live, for them to work, and to raise a family is paramount. We don't have the same budget capacity that we did. So how do we take advantage of what we've learned in the first 8 years and apply it to the next 4 years, again, to make a real impact and real change for New York going forward?
I'm going to ask you about some of the things you've learned working in the Bloomberg administration when CityWide continues right after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Bob Lieber, Deputy Mayor for Economic Development in the Bloomberg administration. You were in the private sector, quite successful in real estate and finance, recruited to the city's Economic Development Corporation, and then became Deputy Mayor. What was the biggest surprise about working inside government?
This is much more complicated and much more difficult than anything I ever imagined. I joked that how could it be so complicated that's not about making money? But when you add the dimensions of elected officials, community boards, the press, Albany, Washington, it is logarithmically more difficult than anything I expected. And the powers of inertia constantly draw you and hold you in place. So you have to be running hard just to stay in place. If you really want to make progress, you have to lean full tilt all the time. You can never back off, or the forces of nature will just sweep you downstream. Sorry about all the mixed metaphors, but it's brutal how hard it is to get stuff done. And that's what makes it so satisfying at the same time, because in my old world, it was deals, deals, deals. You get little tchotchkes about deals, and then you move on to the next one. The things that we can accomplish now really do have a long-lived and a long-lasting impact. And that's what's so exciting about it, and being able to get some of these things done.
So what would you consider to be your biggest success?
Well, I think that I would say that working together with the different agencies and the different teams to try and marshal our way through some of these projects, working with city planning, working with the Economic Development Corporation, Small Business Services, with the community boards. I think a big part of what we tried to do was really engage with the stakeholders in the communities to build consensus around the projects that we wanted to accomplish. And it was very satisfying. I got a letter from one of my so-called, that people would have said would have been on the other side, but that we became friendly, made a big effort, and worked very collaboratively on one of these major projects. But if you look at when I started with 125th Street, you look at Willets Point, which was some 50 or 60 years in the making. The Coney Island just continued to deteriorate since the day I got here. It started before that, and I remember this 20 years ago when we used to go on outings. And then the constant struggle around what we were trying to do or see happen at the World Trade Center. I am, all incredibly important projects. I think another part I've been very satisfied about is, looking at our parks and looking at our waterfront and recognizing that those assets are big contributors to economic development, that they're not separate, but they go together. So whether it be in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, working to alienate parkland there and create new parkland, whether it be Governor's Island, as you well know, Brooklyn Bridge Park, other very, very important parts of creating neighborhoods and really creating places where people can live. The expression live, work, and raise their family has been enormously, very, very rewarding.
One of the Flashpoint issues I think that's emerging on the policy agenda and was called into sharp relief by the Kingsbridge Armory project is the notion that the city should require living wages or prevailing wages on the part not just of people who build things for the city, but who do business with the city. If they're given any type of economic development incentive, some have even gone so far as to say if they get a zoning change that creates a higher value in the land, that they and their business associates, their tenants or whatever, should be required to pay higher wages. Is that good public policy, and how do you see that issue shaking out?
I think it's horrible public policy, and I think it's a horrible way to try and actually generate what you want, which are jobs for people in neighborhoods. To me, if you look at Kingsbridge, for example, over 2,000 jobs were lost because that project didn't move forward.
But the borough president said better no job than a poverty job.
Right, and to me, I can't believe that anyone could actually say that with a straight face. I can't believe any of the constituents would actually support that. I think that's just, let people decide, give them an opportunity. One of our key components of the Kingsbridge plan was to get people the jobs and also to get them the training and the skills so they had the opportunity to better themselves. And that was a key component of our package there is, let the market decide what people get paid, but let's make sure we give people the opportunity to earn the best living that they possibly can. This isn't a God-given right at this wage level. This is something that people earn and they have the skills. And if we can't provide the skills or the opportunities for them, then shame on us. But that's what we've been working so hard in the Bloomberg administration to achieve, is to give people opportunity. They can work one job, they can work two jobs. But this is something, to lose that opportunity there, I think, is a tragedy. And I think it's naive to think that you can do it, because if you have a project that requires that tenants pay a higher wage, a 50% or higher wage, guess what? Tenants aren't going to go there. They're going to go to another project next door that doesn't have that same requirement, or they're going to go somewhere in a different jurisdiction. So I think it's very short-sighted and very narrow-minded to think that that could be that's a good thing.
But didn't the Bloomberg administration open the door to that policy? When Dan Doctoroff was the deputy mayor and you were doing the Greenpoint Williamsburg rezoning, which you mentioned earlier, 32BJ, the union that has the doorman and the porters and so forth, got the mayor to agree to get all of those developers on the waterfront to pledge that they would be 32B union jobs in the new buildings that were going up there.
Well, I think you have to look at what is what are the opportunities and what are the requirements. And we want to work with labor, we want to work with organized labor because we want to create these kinds of jobs. So it's important for us to support these initiatives, but we can't mandate them in a way that disadvantages one project over another, or nothing's going to happen. So it's not that we don't support the unions and the opportunity to better their participants. It's we want to make sure things actually get done. And the problem with the living wage proposal at Kingsbridge was it isolated it on that project. Therefore, the developer would never be able to find a tenant willing to do it. And we'd seen it. It's just a constant morphing of what was there before. So we'll give people the opportunity. We went through an extensive RFP process in Kingsbridge, which said we would give the benefit to the developer who was able to provide a wage standard there. No one responded that they would do that. So we made that part of the preconditions for the selection process. The market still did not respond to it. So we presented it as an opportunity. No one responded. And the reason they didn't respond is because they couldn't build a competitive project if they did it.
Now, I had Mike Fishman, the head of 32BJ, on the show a couple of months ago. We talked about what happened. He thought right up until the very end that some kind of compromise was going to be reached. So just give us a little insight into what was going on behind the scenes. You were saying no publicly. I guess you were saying no privately, but somehow that message didn't seem to have been heard.
Well, I think that with Mike and his team, with Kevin Doyle as well, we had worked with them and we had reached an accommodation with them, with the developers. But it was the blanket requirement that was imposed on the retailers that would exist to that. And we were trying to find a way that would, again, we wanted to emphasize the opportunity to create the skills in the population and in the community that would advantage them to compete more effectively in the future. So we had taken a pot of the proceeds that we were going to receive as the city to use that as a way to try and incentivize more jobs and to incentivize a better wage scale and to incentivize the training and the skills necessary, because the retailing industry is inherently a relatively high churn business. We wanted it to be a stickier business and give retailers the opportunity to have a workforce that had more skills that could stay and work longer, and not impose it on them, but give them the opportunity to do it.
What do you think the growth industries are for New York over the next 5 years?
I think when we look forward, we look out 5 years and figure out what the biggest growth industry is going to be, it's one we haven't even thought about yet. And that's what's so fascinating about what the levers are that we can pull in government. What we're trying to do is to populate as many different areas as we can with the resources that the city has and the power that the city has or government has to really to be a convener of a number of different kinds of industries and talents. We want to be a talent magnet. We want to be the place that draws people to New York because they want to find opportunities. And whether it's in the biosciences or life sciences area, whether it be in the digital media, whether that be continue to be in tourism and hospitality, all those sectors are things that, I think have been big contributors in the past. And the next new thing is something we're still waiting to see.
So what should the mayor be looking for in your successor? You've announced you're going back to the private sector. You're going to be in the real estate business. Who does Mike Bloomberg need? What's the profile of the person that Mike Bloomberg needs now?
I think it's I think you have to be willing to work your butt off. I think you have to be willing to figure out how you can work collectively or collaboratively with your colleagues around government and in the private sector and in public sector. I think part of what I was trying to do was make sure we had as reasonably strong a relationship we could with our other colleagues in elected offices, whether it be in the state or otherwise. And I think it's kind of the issue about trying to get stuff done, to set up metrics, to set up goalposts, to take these projects and see that you get through it. And you have to be able to hire and attract great people, because it's really about the people who work with you more than the person who's in my seat, because they're the ones that actually get this stuff done.
My thanks to Robert Lieber, New York City's Deputy Mayor for Economic Development. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or contact us at www.cuny.tv.